the Super Nintendo. Now, for those of us who are old enough to have grown up with this console, of course that means we're older than dirt, but we also have a long list of fond memories that go along with it. I still remember going to the supermarket every Tuesday with my mom and brother to pick out games because that's when they would run their 2-for-1 rental deal. And even when we could agree on the same game, it was always better to tell mom that we couldn't so we could get two. Back then we didn't have the internet to tell us what games were good and what were terrible, so we didn't really know what to avoid, and we also didn't really have the money to afford the magazines. So we were often just taking a stab in the dark and hoping for the best. It was always trial and error. As I've grown from an immature video game loving child into an immature video game loving adult, I look back on those days spent cross-legged in the living room, sitting down with the NES as some of the best gaming memories in my life, pretty much. And, those memories would be a lot more awkward and boring if it wasn't for, the games. So, what we're going to do right now is we are going to take a look at my top 10 Super Nintendo games of all time. And as I just said, it's my favorites, my top 10. So, even though we're probably going to disagree, that's kind of the fun of this. So, after you check it out, leave your stuff in the, make your list, drop it in below, tell me how wrong I am, tell me why I'm wrong. And then I'll tell you why no, I'm not. Anyways, let's get started. And here I go again, getting right back into the cheating, because the thing is, I don't really remember playing this game as a kid. I mean, I'm almost positive that we rented it at some point, but my memories with this game, they come from playing it as a teen heading into my early 20s. See, my friends Mike and Dave insisted that we play it, and despite them both being far better than I was, I absolutely fell in love with it immediately. I mean, you're getting to fight and control Megazords. I mean, it's everything that I never realized I need in my life. I mean, the controls, they're fine as far as fighting controls go. There's nothing really special about them, but they're adequate. And this is easily one of the best licensed games that I've ever played, especially from that era. So if you've got a Super Nintendo and you have friends to play, I highly recommend tracking down this game. You won't be disappointed because, again, Megazords! Battletoads in Battle Maniacs is notorious among most gamers for its unforgiving difficulty. But for me, it's remembered as one of the best games that I ever rented as a kid. My brother and I would co-op our way through this game every time we rented it, getting slightly further with each attempt. Now, I don't remember it being hard because I just remember the two of us abusing each other through the friendly fire until we were either dying of laughter or dying from trying to strangle each other for sabotaging the game. This game was just so much fun as a kid. I mean, you get to control two of the Battletoads in an absolutely absurd beat 'em up. It may be tough as nails, but it's also an absolute blast to play. If you haven't played it before, you really should. The difficulty, it does rival the fun that you'll have playing the game, but it's totally worth sinking some time into. I cannot think about the Super Nintendo without thinking about how beautiful Donkey Kong Country is. The 3D sprites look stellar, and the gameplay follows the structure that Nintendo's most well known for. It's easy to pick up and play, but it's difficult to master. The best thing to me was always rolling through the caves on the rails. Now, despite how infuriating that could be when you die, and die, and die. But ignore that because the game is so much fun that No matter how many times I died, I always managed to overcome the rage and just keep playing. And with a game this beautiful and this much fun, it's hard to not just keep playing. This is another one that goes back to my number 10 issue. Now, I remember playing this briefly as a kid, but I just didn't get into it. Now, though, playing it through the Virtual Console on the Switch, I'm just absolutely in love with this game. And I can see why so many people regard it as one of, if not the best game in the Zelda series. A Link to the Past takes everything that made the first Zelda game a hit and improves on it. There's a real, deep story. There's actually people in the world now, and the gameplay is just addicting. I haven't beaten it yet, but before picking up the Switch, I would have never imagined I'd even consider trying to beat it. And now, I can't imagine not pushing through to victory. When I started thinking about this list, I knew that I wanted to add a wrestling game. Actually, no, I knew that I needed to add a wrestling game. Now, my brother and I were constantly renting WWF Royal Rumble, and I nearly picked it for the spot, but then I remembered that the biggest reason we were always renting it is because this game was often already rented out by some other kid who was out there somewhere in the world enjoying himself without a single thought for how upset I was. That big jerk. Anyways, Capcom didn't rely on known wrestlers for this game, creating a cast of amazing characters that looked close enough to some of the wrestlers that I knew that I could easily pretend that they were real wrestlers. And even if I didn't, Saturday Night Slam Masters is easily one of the best games on the console and easily the best wrestling game of that entire generation. I'm not even going to bother going into why, because eventually I want to do a deep dive into this game. But in the meantime, if you can find it, go get it and play it. And if you're the kid that kept renting it instead of me from Vaughn's and Johnson's, I don't like you very much. Here is a game that I absolutely never played before purchasing it for the Nintendo Switch. But now that I've beaten it, I have to say I absolutely love Star Ocean. I played through Second Story, the sequel, on the original PlayStation as a teen, and it's one of my favorite RPGs of all time. You can check out my other list and I'll tell you more about that. But I always wondered what the original game was like. And well, it's like Second Story, just shorter and with a smaller scope. And while it's a bit more limiting than its sequel, it's clear playing this game that it's absolutely something special. It's a unique RPG that takes away waiting for your turn to act. You can craft, you can compose music, and put skill points into so many things that have nothing to do with hitting the bad guy with the pointy end of your sword. Now, if you haven't played it, it's available on the Switch as Star Ocean First Departure. Just get it. I want to be clear here. I'm limiting this to one game per franchise on the list, which does mean Final Fantasy VI is not on this list. I know, I'm sorry. But I've never played it all the way through, so it'd be unfair, and I'm sure that there's a good chance that it could replace this game if I played it, but I haven't yet, and I don't want to lie just to be cool. Although I would love to be cool. Anyways, it's Final Fantasy IV. I know it says Final Fantasy II, but that's just one of those weird things that happened back in this era. So as I was saying before, Final Fantasy IV places you in the shoes of Cecil Harvey, a dark knight who ends up on the outs of this kingdom fighting to save the world. You know, a common theme with RPGs. It's the game that introduced me to the active time battle system that I love so much from Final Fantasy VII and 8. Now, the story is full of twists, and despite being decades old, I don't want to ruin anything. So, if you like to play RPGs and you haven't played this one, What is wrong with you? Look, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Moving on. Look, I know what I just said about not wanting to be cool, and kind of wanting to be cool, but that has nothing to do with this. It's impossible to have a list of the top Super Nintendo games and not include Super Mario World. I mean, if you've played it, you get it. This game takes Mario 3 and expands on it while simplifying things like the power-ups and making a huge focus on exploration. I remember spending hours with my brother and my mom going through this game, combing through the levels, trying to find every single hidden corner of the game. And we were just amazed each time we just kept finding new secrets. Now, my mom and I, we didn't get to play a lot of games together. Gaming wasn't really a big priority for her. So, remembering how much fun I had going through her with this game, just those memories alone put this easily into the number 3 spot on this list. Now here we go. Back to the second game that I ever made a video on. Mega Man X is hands down the best game of the entire X series. And yes, I'll fight you over this if you really want to argue and be wrong. This is one of the first games that my parents bought us, and we just tore right through it. My brother and I just devoured every bit of content and every secret the game had to offer. In more recent years, I went through the internet looking for anything we may have missed, and I'm happy to say that we were quite thorough in our dissection of this game. The controls are tight, the pace is frantic, but allows just enough breathing room for you to plot your strategy. I've already said a lot about this game before. It may be one of the greatest games that Capcom has ever put out, and was nearly my number 1 entry on this list. However, that spot goes to... Could it have ever been anything else? I'm a sucker for RPGs, and while Mega Man is one of my favorite games of all time, I just cannot get enough Chrono Trigger. It's one of the greatest masterpieces that Square has ever created, and given the success of the Final Fantasy series, that's no small accomplishment. This game never gets the love that it deserves from its creators, but for those of us who have experienced it, it'll forever hold a special place in our hearts. I could, and maybe even should, tell you about the game's story, which is just such a deep story for that time period, or any, really. And it still holds up today. I should tell you about the battle system and how it's refined and it's intuitive, and how it just makes you feel part of the action. I should tell you that this is one of the most beautiful games on the console. But instead, I just want to tell you that you really need to play this game. And if you haven't, I do feel sorry for you. If you have, you know what I'm saying right now is true. And just like me, just thinking about this game, you want to go and play it again and again. And there you have it, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at these classic Super Nintendo games. And yes, I do apologize for not putting Super Metroid on the list, but that just means that there's more room for it on your list. Speaking of, please share your top 10 in the comments below, give a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to see more content like this. I am the Unhinged Gamer, and I look forward to you seeing me again soon.